Go. Please welcome 9-time Oscar nominee Bradley Cooper. Welcome. Miss Mulligan will be joining us shortly. She is stuck in traffic, but I get a chance to talk to you about your directing. When I introduced the film, I mentioned that we all know what an amazing actor you are, but the fact that you're now an amazing, amazing director.
Thank you.
It's remarkable.
This is awesome. Thank you for being here. Wow. All the way in the back. This theater's incredible, isn't it? Yeah.
Right off the bat, why, tell us, the film has a structure of a symphony, and then on top of that, you weaved through, we go from black and white to color, and you play with aspect ratios. Can you tell us about that, telling the story in this way?
Sure. It all started, I think, from having an anchor story-wise. Everything has to sort of come from the story. And as I was doing research, this relationship, this wonderful dynamic between Felicia Montealegre and Leonard Bernstein emerged. And I thought, oh, well, this is something cinematic. This is worth telling a story. In order to do that, I'm going to have to spend a lot of decades, 5, because to really tell their story, I really start when they meet and sort of towards the end. So all of a sudden, I started to see what the movie visually was going to have to entail. There's nothing better than this. The nuclear power of the film is his music, and I always knew that early on. So I thought, okay, so if I could tell this story about this relationship musically to his, literally scored to his music, which is why you see him at the end there, because unfortunately, many people won't even know that's his music until the end when it says music by Leonard Bernstein, and you realize that he's actually been with us this whole time watching this film. That's how it all sort of started. And then just like logistically, all the halls are very vertical. And in order to maintain so you could see the baton, the 1:3:3 aspect ratio is very helpful as opposed to the 1:8:5. Also, I wanted to cinematically talk about his relationship to his destiny and to God. And that's why I like that sort of POV, the God sort of pulling him in the beginning of the film away out of the clouds down to all of us normal people and then pushing him out for his destiny. And that all was to the 1:3:3 aspect ratio, and also depth, and then close-ups at that 1:3:3, and also one's memory. Sorry to keep going.
No. Hey,
one's memory, at least of that time period in those films. It's that aspect ratio. So I never wanted to have chyrons of like this is 1955. I always wanted us to feel like we were in the room with the people or outside looking in, never really safe, always immersed into it. So in order to do that, that aspect ratio was just a wonderful tool to allow us to enter into that world.
But it's far richer than that. At the latter half of the film, the change in the aspect ratios, there is like a reality starts setting in for him, and that is reflected in that. And then when she dies also, the aspect ratios gets even larger, which emphasizes the loneliness of the character. Am I right?
Well, it only changes once. It's 1:3:3 all the way up until her death, and then when REM comes in with the Jaguar and the Maestro 1 license plate, that's when we go to the 1:8:5. And that was, again, as he got older, his baton would lengthen because he couldn't raise his hand as much, Lenny, and so it's just more sort of this horizontal sort of lifestyle. And also, again, movies from the 80s, our memory is not in 1:3:3, it's in 1:8:5. And also, is he freer? Is the world more open, or is he more lonely? That's for the viewer, but that's why I wanted it to then be into that 1:8:5 aspect ratio.
And you mentioned about the depth. Foreground, midground, background. There's always the sense that something's pulling him away, or that he's being driven
That's
into.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Can you?
Yeah, very early on, in terms of visually sort of thinking about the film. A Star is Born, which was the last time I was here, I remember, which was a wonderful experience. Yeah,
Thank you.
It was all left and right to left that they would come off. Often Jackson Maine would be coming in from off. And this movie is all about foreground and background. They're him being pulled and then what's happening in between them. So you're absolutely right. That was like very early on. That's how I started to think about the film. And then that became just fun cinematically, especially in the beginning with the cacophony of noise and crowded compositions, you know, where he's on the toilet composing and Jerry Robbins in the background, David Oppenheim's by the piano, and the guy opens the door, hits the door, and then we go, and we're just going back and forth from either side of that long sort of, you know, train track row of people. That was a lot of fun to explore that kind of stuff.
You also musically tell us a story. You know, using the opera A Quiet Place to bookend the film. You know, the Mahler Symphony. You know, can you tell us about using his music to help tell the story as well?
And that was all about research. Stephen Wadsworth, who was the librettist for A Quiet Place, I became friends with. He teaches directing at Juilliard, and he was filming Lenny in the 80s, and he was going to make a sort of theatrical show, and he was so kind to show me so much of that. And there's footage of Lenny playing that broken piano piece of A Quiet Place. And I just thought, oh, that's got to be in the movie. And from that, I thought, what a beautiful bookend, because he was thinking about Felicia at that moment in the video that I was watching. And A Quiet Place is about a breakup. It's sort of the sequel to Trouble in Tahiti. And so it was sort of many moments like that of just having years of research and wonderful people who were willing to open up their experiences with Lenny and Felicia to us. Like, you know, Cynthia O'Neill telling me that story about Felicia going on that date and the person asking to be set up with Mendy. You know, that's all stuff that, you know, and then I think it was MTT told me about how he saw, you know, the kid and said, I slept with both your parents. You know, that's all real stuff. Mm-hmm. That these gems of information that I was able to then, with Josh Singer, incorporated and weave into the movie. And then music, the Mahler, again, because he's one of the most videoed, photographed musicians ever. One of the earliest things that I came across on YouTube was him performing Mahler's Resurrection at Ely Cathedral in the 70s with the London Symphony Orchestra, and I was just sort of blown out of the water watching this. And I would show all my friends, look at this, you know. And early on, I thought this can be the classical pillar for the movie, because I wanted there to be a musical theater aspect to it, and then the classical conducting. Mm-hmm. And On the Town and Fancy Free, that sort of functions as that part of his artistic donation, and then his conducting was the Mahler.
And how does the Underwater Front fit in?
Yeah, that was one of the early things. I always wanted to be, again, you to be just like a tsunami hitting us with this guy's energy, and what better way than the percussion, the timpani of On the Waterfront. So that was something that sort of came to me like 5 years ago and was part of the pitch, actually, to Netflix and other studios. I would sort of pitch the first 5 minutes of the movie, and that really didn't change at all. So it was very fulfilling to actually then shoot that. Mm-hmm.
There's so much. You're giving me so much information, and I want to come back. No, it's amazing. First, the cathedral. That's one take. It's breathtaking. We're so immersed.
Yeah, thank you.
And you're acting your body and soul, every movement. It's just amazing. Can you tell us about filming that sequence? One take.
That was one setup, one take, because the other takes I messed up. And the other takes were made out of fear. I was terrified that I was not going to be able to pull it off, so I provided myself with a cushion by having multiple cameras during things, and that wasn't how we shot the film at all otherwise. And sort of I think that was Lenny saying, like, what are you doing, bro? Which I felt a lot in this movie. I really have to say, I would be lying if I said I felt like I ever acted in this movie. I felt like I just got out of the way and he came in. That is how I experienced it. And even watching it, I just see him. I don't know, that's how I experienced it. And so with that, I was very much me, terrified conducting, because we did it live for the first day, and I kept getting behind tempo and forgetting to cue the brass, and it was a fucking nightmare. I mean, it was like those things, where you think, oh, it's not going to be that bad. You're like, no, actually it is that bad, and it's embarrassing, and you spend 6 years preparing, and you're messing it up. Hey!
Oh my goodness! Here's Miss Mulligan. Carey, look. Welcome, Miss Mulligan.
I'm so sorry I'm late.
Oh, are you kidding me? You made a great entrance.
The traffic was really bad.
Well, Bradley was, catch your breath, Bradley was in the middle of telling us about the shooting at the cathedral sequence.
Anyway, I messed it up and then I got it right. Yeah. So I kept messing up and it was horrible. And then I went to bed that night and it was horrible. And I texted the sound mixer and said, "We have it, right? Don't we have it?" Which is not, I don't think a sound mixer wants to receive that from a filmmaker in the middle of the night. A text saying, "I think we have it, don't we?" ? And he wrote back, "I think so." And because of the way we shot this movie, I would go into hair and makeup 5 to 6 hours before crew call. So I'm already Lenny walking in through the bowels of this cathedral the next morning. And again, this sort of conversation with my man, and I thought, I can't give up. And we had a techno crane waiting outside because we were going to shoot an exterior shot of her approaching, which all we wound up using was just that wide of the cathedral. And I brought in the techno crane, and I had it recorded from the other day on my phone how long it was that we played the Mahler. And we just spent about 2 hours just walking with the crane, and I had somebody with the bow to make sure we could go over. And I created that whole entire shot that ended on her over her right shoulder, because that's what the scene's about. It's like, the scene's about her coming to see him and that there's no hate in his heart. That's the scene, and it's always a reminder, just what's the story? Forget a cool shot, what's the story? What's the story? And that then dictated that shot, invited everybody back in, said a prayer out loud.
Wow.
And then we did it, and we did it, and it worked.
Amazing,
yeah.
Amazing. And regarding that scene, to me, after the person that you go to shake hands with after the concert, it's not her. And to me, when I watch this movie, it just breaks my heart. To me, that's the moment of betrayal. And I think you portray this character not as a victim. You've come to terms with the relationship, but can you tell us about, from your vantage?
Are you talking about Mass? You mean when they're watching it?
Correct, yeah. Yeah. Will you tell?
Yeah, that was, and she was always very clear that she wasn't, even from the letter that she wrote to him when they first decided to get married. She said, I think she says in the letter, "You are a homosexual and may never change." And there's something along the lines of, "But I think I can do this without sacrificing myself at the altar of LB," that she was sort of determined to not be, and that it was a choice. She was always choosing it. It wasn't something that was being put on her. And I think that arrangement was understood. That was, that was how their life was functioning. It was functioning well. Mm-hmm. But it was, as you say, it wasn't an infidelity in the bedroom. It was to do with, she'd given her life over to being everything to him that he needed creatively as well as spiritually. And for him to then choose someone else in his moment of real need, creatively and spiritually, was the heartbreak.
In film, you have previously, Carey, given us amazing performances, but in theater, you have had this incredibly demanding roles, but never in cinema until this film. This is, to me, the most demanding role you've had. You rose to the occasion brilliantly. Can you tell us, am I right about the fact that this is the most... not just in the brilliant part, but the fact that this is the most demanding role you've had.
Yeah, 100%. And I remember thinking that when Bradley offered it to me and thinking, you know, I got to play Nina in The Seagull when I was 21, and it kind of set this kind of impossibly high bar of what there was out there for women, you know, for younger actor, and just for women, you know, what are the roles really? There are so few, even in theatre, relatively, there are so few, and I felt like, God, I got the best one. I now have to wait till I'm Arkadina. You know, I've got another 20, 30 years before I can, you know, and so that did feel, and then I got to play some great parts on stage, but then in film, never felt like I had the breadth of that sort of epic journey until I read Felicia, until Bradley offered me this part.
And Bradley, my follow-up question earlier when you were talking about working with the script, you could have gone the typical biopic route. Instead, you focus on this relationship. You know, can you tell us about your approach to that?
Yeah, I mean, it was really about, as it always is, why am I supposed to do this as opposed to someone else, and what is it that I can offer? And it really is, what is it that interests me? What is something that I feel like I can explore that hopefully you will then relate to? And also by the sheer fact that he is so photographed, so videoed, it would be an incredible documentary, and many have been made. But what's the point of just redoing that and chronicling his life? That's not anything that I don't know why I would spend 6 years doing that. It's like it's already there, you know. But what's a story that we can relate to? And all of a sudden, these iconic mythical figures become human, and then I don't feel so alone. And that's why I go to the movies, and that's why movies have affected me anyway. So it's always down to what's the human element. And it's nuclear and cinematic because it's Leonard Bernstein and Felicia Montealegre, but the story has to be, you know, very human, and that's why. And so it was just about, it wasn't really about not doing something. It was about what would be the reason to spend all this time and ask all of these incredible artists to come aboard and explore this story that we could then present to you and hopefully you relate to.
And Carey, since it's movies, we watch the movie, but movies that really touch us, we always remember one iconic visual in it. And for this particular film, I'll never be able to forget you seated with him back to back. It's just such an iconic scene. How did that come about?
Well, that was part of, we started working together in 2018, so and Bradley and I've known each other since 2009, so we were sort of friendly, but Bradley asked me to do the job in 2018, and from there we had sort of these periods where we would do stuff, like we went to Philadelphia in 2019 and narrated Candide together for a week, which was crazy, and I didn't even know that you could narrate operas. I thought it was all singing, so I was very confused by the whole thing. But we did that, and we did all these kind of, every time I was in LA or New York, we would read the script together with Josh and with Tim Monick, and so we had these like periods of time together and doing our own preparation. But then when I'd finally moved to New York with my family, one of the first things we did was this workshop, this 5-day dream workshop, where we worked with a woman called Kim Gillingham. And we did, just the two of us, just a week of just working together on these characters. And in that week, which was very kind of, sort of, we did it in Bradley's loft in New York, and we always say, like, what happens in the loft stays in the loft. It was, like, deeply emotional. But amazing, because by the end of it, we were, like, unbelievably bonded. And in that week, that image kind of happened. It just kept happening, that we would end up just sitting back to back. So Bradley wrote it in as the kind of framework for.
And what is it like for you to be on set and you're being directed by somebody who's impersonating Bernstein? I mean, this whole dynamic of being directed by.
I mean, it was a person. It wasn't an impersonation, it was a person. So it did the most incredible gift to me of just, I would walk on set and be like, oh, there's Lenny. Not like, oh, there's Bradley, or there's my boss, or there's my director, just like, oh, there's Lenny. So then I don't have to act, it just took away so much of the artifice, because he'd been Lenny for like probably 6 hours before I got there, because he was, Lenny from like 2 in the morning. Yeah, so it actually made the world so much more believable to me that he was already sort of that he was already Lenny. There was no other way of describing it, and there was no line. I couldn't see the line between him as a director, him as the writer, him as the producer, and him as Lenny. It was just like this one was nuts.
And Bradley, you had the full buy-in of the Bernstein family. When you approached them about focusing on this marriage, what was their reaction?
At first, when I first approached them, first of all, the best thing is just do it honestly. And I didn't have anything other than I wanted to be a conductor since I was a kid. And as I'm sitting there with Jamie Bernstein at the cook shop, I started eating spinach with my hands. And she said, because I was so tired, I wouldn't have normally have done that. And she said, my dad used to do that. I remember when she said that, I thought, oh, I think they're gonna maybe give us the rights to the music. And they did. But I didn't have anything other than, asking Santa Claus for a baton at 8. I didn't. And I'd showed them A Star Is Born. It hadn't come out yet, but I showed them a cut of that. And then soon after, like a month after, when I was researching, that's when I was like, oh, here's the movie. And then I proposed that to them. And you'd have to ask them, but I think that they didn't quite believe me. I think that they were like, oh, okay. But then as we kept evolving, they were like, oh, they're really going to make a movie about our mother, too. And I think that they were very happy, I hope. Yeah, I know they were. Yeah, they were very happy about that.
And Carey, you had full, they guided you, they helped, you met with them. I read also you went to Chile, to visit her family. Tell us about that aspect.
Yeah, they were amazing from the first moment. I met them in Philadelphia when we narrated Candide. That was the first time, and I remember thinking, I was really nervous. It was like, kind of like meeting my boyfriend's parents in a weird way. I was like, oh, I want them to like me. But they were just amazing. And so, yeah, there were times, then it was lockdown, there was lots of Zooms and things, but I wanted to go to Santiago to see where she lived, where she grew up, where she did a lot of her childhood. So they introduced me to the wider family, and I went down there, and I went to her school, I went to the old neighborhood she lived in. I met her brother-in-law, who was 95, I think he sadly passed away now, but he was 95, and he was in Ancedonia with them for a couple of months in the summer of 67. And he had stories. He said that basically everything was going very well until Lenny showed up. And then it was just chaotic, which sounded on track. And so, yeah, they were amazing. They were unbelievably generous and warm. And
quirky question. You have this fascination with this gold lighter, and there's intrinsic interest in the film with this gold lighter.
It's biographical.
Yeah.
What is the relationship?
Well, that's Felicia's real lighter. So that's hers. They gave it to me before we started shooting to keep. And it's engraved with Felicia de Bernstein on the bottom, F de Bernstein. So I still have it, but it was hers from as soon as it goes to colour onwards, that was hers. But they lived for these things, didn't they? They didn't have, this was just...
And cinematically, it was, foreshadowing her death, that she didn't even realize that she was killing herself the whole movie.
That's amazing.
Not to be too dark, sorry. There is humor, right? Snoopy, no?
Bradley, this was a script that had been originally developed by Spielberg, and he handed it to you to consider to play Bernstein. Can you tell us a little bit about the background?
Sure. I think originally, Fred Berner and Amy Durning are producers, and they came up with this idea that they then pitched to Martin Scorsese, I think 20-some years ago, and then Josh Singer wrote a script for Martin Scorsese, and then I think Martin Scorsese then gave it to Steven Spielberg, and it was a biopic, a movie. And then Steven and he was going to maybe do American Sniper years ago, and that's how he and I became very close. And then during that, he remembered that I loved conducting so much. And he just talked to me about maybe playing Leonard Bernstein in a movie. And then I said, oh, and I read that script, but I was so in my brain about how much I felt like I found something I love, which is writing and directing. And I said, listen, are you really going to do this? Because if not, I love conducting. I'd love to just research and see if there's a movie I could write about, and I'll learn about Leonard Bernstein. So that's how that happened. So then he was kind enough and generous enough to say, go for it, here's a blank canvas.
But you completely rewrote the script.
Yeah, it was from, yeah.
And when did you realize that?
With Josh Singer, who wrote he came with me, and then we just started fresh and started researching and figuring out what is a movie that's worth telling.
And putting her on the spot, what was it about Carey that felt that?
For some reason, whenever I was looking at any of these images, Carey Mulligan kept popping into my head, like every single image. And there was this Edward R. Murrow interview that I saw, and I was like, well, that's Carey Mulligan. And then she just happened to be doing a one-woman show in the West Village at that time, and I went to see it. What's that?
At the Minetta Lane
that's
Theater.
right. And then I went to see it, and she came out, and there was a key light right on her, and she had blonde hair, and Felicia had blonde hair for much of her life. And I didn't really know Carey always had blonde hair, and so I was like, oh, there's Felicia. And again, it was like Lenny saying, well, there it is. And then from then on, that was it. She was kind enough to meet me at Clooney Cafe that like 2 days later, and she did hit her head, and we went to the hospital, but that's another story. and then that was it. And then she, by the way, she signed on with no script, no script, just an idea, and was willing to go down the road without getting paid for years as I was shopping the movie around, and was still willing to go to Philadelphia for nothing and do all of these things when it was just two people who were exploring this thing together. So I'm forever indebted to her for doing that. That's not often that happens. They're like, yes, 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 and then you wait for their lawyer to call you, But this was really, we just started.
Amazing. Carey, we've seen so many movies in our lives, and we think about chemistry between their two leading persons, but you and Bradley have this incredible connection, complete connection as performers on screen. What do you allude that connection to?
I mean, first of all, I couldn't believe my luck that you asked me to do it. Like, just to, I worked largely in independent film and theatre for a long, long time since The Great Gatsby, and so films of this scale were not like knocking on my door. So just like it was an amazing privilege for me. I'd always wanted to work with Bradley as an actor. Then I saw A Star Is Born and knew that I had to work with him as a director. So the package was incredible. I think in terms of us, like we both loved these people, and we were devoted to telling their story and devoted over years. And then again, I think this final workshop was key to that. Like it was just kind of bonded for life, whatever. And the whole way through filming, we kept on going like, God, I just want to only act with you ever. So it was just so like, I don't know, it was like weird. Yeah. We were all just like, oh, let's just do this. Let's go and do a play, It was just that.
And Bradley, you gave her top billing. You also give her the last shot of the film. It's Carey.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't give it to her. The movie did. I mean, that's what the movie wanted. The movie, the way I see it is she's the protagonist, he's the antagonist. He doesn't change. I mean, the same guy that beats the guy's butt is the same guy who is dancing with William, and she goes through the arc. And yeah, so I always saw it that way. We did a sort of proof of concept years ago, and I had put the title over her. That was back in like 2019. So it was just the movie always sort of told me that.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here. What an honor.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you, everybody.